Hello again. I'm Paul Beckwith. My last video on the new puppy, who, if you have good name suggestions for this puppy, I mean, we have ideas like Newton or Odin or something like that. You know, it has to be some sort of explorer type to match this guy, Shackleton. He's right behind me. Luckily, the puppy is sleeping for a little bit, so Shackleton's very, very interested, goes up very, very close and says, "What's going on? Who is this thing?" So anyway, the last video got kind of abruptly cut off because I ran out of phone memory. I'm doing longer videos, so I have to be more aware of the storage capacity on my phone. No, stay here, Shacky. Come on, lie down. Lie down. Oh, don't go bother the doggy. Doggy's sleeping, okay? Maybe we'll just call him Doggy. Anyway, send in your suggestions if you have some great explorer names for the dog. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about climate change. Just going to give you kind of a synopsis of what's going on. First of all, you're probably aware that the police moved in and took them 3 days, and they got the protesters out of downtown Ottawa. So that's a big relief to anybody living here, all the noise. And it was really an occupation or a siege as compared to a protest. I mean, the idea of bringing in huge trucks for protests is very problematic for cities. When they sit and park there for weeks on end, blaring their horns and disrupt everybody's lives, it's very problematic. And the sources of funding and the extreme right-wing elements involved are very concerning. I see it as part of a continuum to stresses and threats to democracy, and the stresses on society from abrupt climate change are going to cause a lot of fear and angst in the population. And one way that fear and angst is expressed in the population is populism and tribalism, which we're seeing in various places. Of course, today also is, Russia's Putin has sent, Russian forces into Ukraine just today. It's been an ongoing story, the massing of troops on the border, but today, flicked the switch and Putin decided to go in to Ukraine from the north, the east, and the south. And it's unclear what he's doing. Of course, Trump has called Putin a genius, even now saying he's a genius. There's lots of, lots of problems with that, of course. So on climate, the drought situation in the U.S. is quite bad for, it's a huge concern for the wheat supply in 2022. So west of the Mississippi, large portions of the U.S. are in drought, and the spring is forecast to be extremely warm. Most of the 48 contiguous states are either drought declared or in danger of sliding into drought. In fact, 57% of the regions are in drought and 15% are in abnormally dry situation. 40% have been in drought for the past 70 weeks. 68% of the U.S. winter wheat area is dry. 78% of durum wheat is in drought. 76% of barley in drought, and 75% of sorghum in drought. And of course, Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. Between Ukraine and Russia combined, they produce a huge quantity of the world's grain supply, something like a third, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Another area of concern, great concern, is methane. So from 2008 to 2021, I was looking at a plot, that's 13-year time frame. Methane went up from 1875 parts per million to 1975, parts per billion, 1875 ppb to 1975 parts per billion. That's a rise of 100 parts per billion in 13 years, which works out to just under 8 parts per billion per year. From 2021 to 2022, according to the plot, the graph, which is all over Facebook and Twitter, being posted and shared, it's basically measurements from Barrow, Alaska, and you can go to the raw data and have a look at it. The rise from 2021 to 2022 was 100 parts per billion. So that's just in 1 year. So 1 year from 2021 to 2022, the rise of methane, according to these flask measurements from Barrow, Alaska, increased by the same amount as it took the 13 previous years to rise, 13 times faster rate. Barrow, Alaska, being in the far north, is the methane source is most likely from thawing permafrost on land, and also thawing permafrost on the seafloor, over the shallow continental shelves, and also perhaps from methane hydrates. It has yet to be determined, but it's very serious rise. A rise of 100 in a year. I mean, that's like crazy. If it's verified many other places. Radio Ecoshocks, Alex Smith. So check out Radio Ecoshock. Check out ecoshock.org, the website, or Google Radio Ecoshock. Alex Smith very recently interviewed climate scientist, a methane world-leading expert in methane. His name is Ewan, E-U-A-N, Nisbet, N-I-S-B-E-T. He's at the University of London. He's involved in this UK program called MOYA, M-O-Y-A. What they do is they get flasks of air samples from all over the world that are collected by other people and sent to the lab and analyzed, and they keep track of all of the methane with as much spatial coverage on the planet as possible, but also over time, and they determine what methane is doing, and the rises are, of course, extremely concerning. Okay, so another thing that I want to talk about is Peter Carter continues to generate beautiful graphics that he sends out on Twitter. Make sure you follow him. One of them recently from him is on global warming, is tracking the worst case scenarios. So the Berkeley Earth Science people and the NASA Goddard Institute of Space Science, they've reported a 1.21 degrees Celsius temperature rise in 2021 versus the baseline of 1850 to 1900. Of course, if you take it back to the baseline of 1750, you need to add 0.2 to 0.3, and that brings you up to the up to 1.41 degrees Celsius to 1.51 degrees Celsius over what was the original pre-industrial baseline, which was 1750. So this is extremely concerning. The numbers. So these numbers are as of the end of 2021. The data is just being processed and analyzed. Another slide from Peter Carter that was tweeted out recently is on ocean acidification, is tracking worst case scenarios. The pH of the open ocean on average was about 8.2, and it's dropped to about 8.05 in the last few decades, and this represents a huge issue. There's more and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It combines with raindrops to form carbonic acid, and that falls into the ocean and makes the ocean more acidic. And of course, when that number drops down to 7.9 or so pH, then it's very difficult for shellfish to form their calcite and their aragonite shells. There's been, another thing recently is there's been horrendous storms in the UK. Winds up to 122 miles per hour, which is strong hurricane force winds, torrential rains with associated flooding. One town, for example, North Yorkshire on the River Wharfe, it burst its banks again. The town of Tadcaster, for example, massive flooding. It's the third time in a decade. The UK has experienced Storm Dudley on February 16th, Storm Eunice on February 19th, Storm Franklin on February 21st, and I think another storm, Storm Gladys. So these are back-to-back storms. The polar vortex is strong. The jet streams, crisscrossing, and it's generating very, very high winds. Of course, we're in a shoulder season as we head into spring. So these storms have happened this time of year in the UK, but nothing like what's going on now. In fact, there's so many storms now. Some people in a pub in the UK were saying, well, maybe they should start naming the quiet periods between the storms instead of the storms, because the storms seem to be the norm. They seem to be happening much more frequently, and they're very severe. So instead of naming each of the storms, you have a whole bunch of names. If you just name the quiet periods between storms, maybe those should be named. You'll have fewer names to give out. So another factor, of course, is the ongoing wildfires. So there's been ongoing wildfires in the southern hemisphere. Specifically in Argentina Fires, there's been blazes tearing through northeast Argentina, consuming more land than a typical California wildfire season. And, basically, there's a quote from an 81-year-old resident. He's never seen fires like this. So 81, you've lived quite a long life, and these fires are in a new regime. So basically, in Argentina right now, there's 30,000 hectares of forest that is burned, new forest that is burned, each day. Yeah, 30,000 hectares a day. That's double. If you take the size of New York, Staten Island, which is often used as a reference for area for Americans, it's about 2 of those Staten Island areas per day. That's 30,000 hectares per day. Temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius, 38 degrees, 100 Fahrenheit. 2 million acres have burned there. It's the worst in 70 years, and there's a huge South American drought going on, and there was spark from a passing train, which started off the latest massive fire in California in a typical year. California, the average acreage of wildfire since 2017 is 1.6 million acres. So 2 million acres in Argentina. It's causing huge problems there. There was a new article came out on wildfires, talking about how the world must brace for more extreme wildfires. And the IPCC report, Working Group 2 for AR6, Assessment Report 6, is supposed to be released as early as Monday, so in a couple days. And there's a lot of, I think that's on impacts, and there's a lot on wildfires apparently. So some of the news story, you're going to see lots of news stories on climate in the next week or so, and I'll start covering quite a few of those when I get puppy downtime. Queensland, Australia's east coast has had wild weather. It's had torrential rains, flooding lots of land and infrastructure. I saw an image of a train that had derailed because the tracks were flooded, the tracks were underwater, ground really soggy. The weight of the train on it gave way, and the train derailed. There was one place that multiple places are getting huge rainfall amount. So the Sunshine Coast area, 423 millimeters of rain fell in 6 hours. That's 0.423 meters. It's about, it's over a foot, 1.2, 1.3 feet of rain in 6 hours. And the flooding is on par with the massive floods in 2011. This is in the southeast, Queensland, South Brisbane area. So massive flooding and torrential rains in Australia. While we're on the southern hemisphere, let's talk about Antarctica. So Antarctic sea ice is dropping off a cliff. It's at record low levels. Sam Carana did some calculations and looked at the data of Antarctic sea ice. So February 20th, 2022, the record low was 1.983 million square kilometers of sea ice. February 20th of 2008 was 3.783 million square kilometers. So that's a drop of about 1.8 million square kilometers, which corresponds to about 0.36% of the total Earth's surface area. If you take the average solar insolation of 340 watts per square meter, with a 30% albedo, and ice albedo, that's of the globe. Ice is about 0.9, water is about 0.6. Water on ice is about 0.6, and open water is about 0.06 or 6%. Then you can calculate the change of radiative forcing from that lack of sea ice as being 0.612 watts per meter squared, according to Sam Carana's calculation. If we lost the rest of the ice, you would double that number, so it would be a radiative forcing of 1.224 watts per square meter. And the radiative forcing in 2019 versus 1750 from greenhouse gases is 2.72 watts per square meter. So when we lose more and more of this sea ice, the warming greatly accelerates, and that's what we're seeing. Also, there was an article about tourism in Antarctica, and people causing the black soot, which accumulates on the Antarctica glaciers and also on the sea ice, and accelerates the melting because it lowers the albedo. So in the early 1990s, there were about 10,000 people that would go on vacations and visit parts of Antarctica or islands off Antarctica. That number went to 75,000 people in 2019. Soot is accelerating the snow melt and the ice melt. Black carbon is being emitted by, mostly by cruise ship exhausts, so the ships that are visiting the region, by cars in the southern hemisphere, by planes, by electric generating power plants, and also it's being blown there by the winds. So that's accelerating the ice loss and snow loss. And, we've talked about this in the Arctic often, wildfires, ash blowing up there, etc. But, Antarctic is much more isolated, much more pristine, but not so much anymore. The soot is becoming a problem in Antarctica as well. Talk about a few more things here. Okay, so here we go. Okay, there was a study, a peer-reviewed study recently that looked at the effect of extreme heat on emergency room visits for mental health conditions. So when places are in extreme heat conditions, then people are being checked into the emergency room. And these are people with insurance coverage because it's tracked through insurance. They're checking in with anxiety, stress, mood disorders, self-harm, childhood onset of behavioral disorders, schizotype disorders, schizophrenia, delusions, etc. Okay, now the uninsured people, they're not being tracked, and they're very vulnerable populations, much lower wealth, and much fewer resources to treat things, to get counseling, etc., if required. So this study, extreme heat and heat waves are very are causing lots of mental health problems and grief. Okay, moving to Greenland, the ice sheet. Feedbacks, the melt rates. We know, obviously in the Arctic summer, as the air temperature gets warmer and warmer, Greenland ice is melting from the surface. As the water around gets warmer and warmer, the ice sheets and the ice that is attached to the land and extending far down into the water is melting faster from the warmer water. But also there's a new mechanism that was found. They measured the temperature on the ice sheet, at high elevation in the center of Greenland, and they found that the melt at the surface of the Greenland ice is, one thing, and we've known about that and measured it, but also the ice melt at the bottom of the ice sheet, which is sitting on the bedrock, is melting often at the same rate as what it is at the surface. And it's determined that there's a lot of heat generated at the base by falling water. So when you have a moulin or a hole sort of cut in the ice by the meltwater, you get a huge waterfall, down into the crevice, and that falling water, by friction, etc., it heats up, and it's actually transferring lots of heat to the base of the Greenland ice sheet, also with just the water temperature. So often in the summer in the Arctic, the heat generated by the falling water is melting the ice from the bottom up. The melt rate is completely unprecedented, and it's not yet included in any of the global models. So it was, it was a big surprise, a new finding. And of course, there was a very good article, extensive report on global sea level rise, and that was put out in the U.S. And it covers not just sea level rise on all U.S. coasts, but also sea level rise globally. And the numbers are always edging up in these reports, right? If they do them every few years, the numbers are always getting higher. The melt rates are always getting higher. Years ago, I posted a number of videos. Can we reach 7 meters of sea level rise by 2070? And I still stick by my number because I was, did back of the envelope calculations using exponential growth rates of both Greenland and Antarctica. And, I'll stick with my number. Hopefully I'm proven wrong, but 7 meters by 2070 is what I say, said years ago, and probably do another video on it soon and say, well, is that still what I think? And the short answer is yes. There was another interesting study on the Earth's coldest forests, and they're in the northern hemisphere. They're shifting northward. And of course that has a huge effect on biodiversity, on wildlife in the region. These are the Boreal Forests, okay, and it's satellite data showing the extent of the Boreal Forests. They stretch across, from east to west, 9,000, 10,000 miles. They're in North America and Eurasia. Basically, these boreal forests are about a quarter of the Earth's forests altogether. There's a 40-year data set, and what's happening is, as it's warming, these boreal forests are expanding into the Arctic, and also into alpine tundra, and the southern extent of these forests is moving northward, as the warming, as the temperature and precipitation regimes in the most southernmost areas become unsuitable for maintaining these these forests. So the whole band of Boreal Forests is moving northward into the up into the Arctic more. And I've given examples where in Siberia, a decade ago, you could have the tallest plant being shrubs and things, much less than a foot or a foot high. And then now you can have entire forests there, of decent sized trees. In a decade, the forests can appear where they weren't before. And I'll finish off with one thing about one very disturbing report. It's the Climate Denial Crocs of the Week report by Peter Sinclair. He does a wonderful job with his videos and his blogs. Anyway, he was talking about Mark Morano, one of the climate deniers, fossil fuel guy, appearing on Fox News with Tucker Carlson. Now, Morano said that the greatest threat to nations was not Russian, not Russian attacks, not nuclear threats, food threats, but clean energy. That's what he actually said. And Tucker Carlson was praising Putin, saying how wonderful he was and trashing America on the very night before the invasion of the Ukraine. And, the reports were so inflammatory for, against the U.S. And for Russia that they appeared on Russian state television. So this is Fox News, doing the propaganda work for Russia. Why Fox News still exists, I have no idea. I mean, we have an open society, but just, stations that are chock full of lies, how can they be called news stations? This is one of the problems of what our world is facing right now. There was an article on the global food supply, of course. Between the Ukraine and Russia, they export about 1/3 of the wheat exports in the world, about 1/5 of the corn exports in the world, and I think 80% of sunflower oil and things like that. This is from a Financial Times report. So, and also the gas supply from Russia is crucial for going to Europe to heat Europe in the winter. And natural gas or methane is one of the main ingredients for producing fertilizers. Okay, so it's all connected. There was also an article about climate change causing huge heat waves in the Great Lakes, 6 times as frequent as 20 years ago. The changes in water temperature in the fresh water in the Great Lakes, of course, affects the plants, it affects the animals, it can cause algae blooms. And with the higher temperatures, higher water temperatures, you get more evaporation, you get more stratification of the water, warm on top, cold below, so you get less vertical mixing, so you get less nutrients being transferred down below and less oxygen. So the entire lake ecosystem suffers, and so that was a major study on that. So, lots of stuff happening, and it's a great time to have a puppy. So there's these crates which they love, and it's his sort of private space, and there he is, he's just having, his eyes are closed and he's like just kind of there napping there. So I hope this lasts for a while. Maybe I can catch some sleep. So anyway, thanks for listening. Bye for now.